We had been at sea for so long that no one could say exactly when it started, not the storm, not the cold, not hunger, but something far quieter, far more unsettling, something that crept into our minds without warning, without sound, without reason. It began with a simple question, one that should have had an easy answer, and yet when it was asked, no one on board could respond. Where are we going? The question came from one of the younger sailors, his voice uncertain, as if he already sensed something was wrong. The men around him exchanged glances, some laughed nervously, others looked away toward the horizon, as if the answer might be written somewhere out there in the endless gray water. But no one spoke, because the truth was, none of us knew. What made it worse was the realization that we should have known. A voyage like ours always had a purpose, a destination, a reason for every mile crossed and every order given. Yet, as the ship creaked softly beneath our feet and the sails shifted with the wind, there was only silence where certainty should have been. The captain was asked next, a man who had led more voyages than any of us, a man whose voice had always carried confidence and direction. But when the question reached him, he hesitated just for a moment, just long enough for every man nearby to notice. Then he answered in a way that chilled us more than any storm we had ever faced. He said, "Keep your course." Nothing more. No explanation, no name of a port, no mention of cargo or mission, just those 3 words, spoken as if repeating something he himself did not fully understand. From that moment, the unease began to spread, because sailors rely on routine, on structure, on knowing their place and purpose at sea. Without that, even the strongest crew can begin to unravel. Slowly at first, it showed in small ways, a missed task, a delayed response to an order, a man standing too long, staring at the water as if expecting it to tell him something. At night, the conversations below deck grew quieter, more uncertain. Voices that once spoke of past voyages and distant lands now circled around the same question again and again, where are we going? And no matter how many times it was asked, no answer ever came. Some of the older sailors began searching their own memories, trying to recall the beginning of the journey, the port we had left, the cargo we had loaded, the instructions given before departure. But every attempt ended the same way, a blank space where those memories should have been, as if someone had taken a knife and carefully removed only the parts that mattered, leaving everything else untouched. And that was the most terrifying part. We remembered everything else perfectly, the creak of the ship, the smell of the wood, the faces of every man on board, the sound of the wind in the sails. But not a single one of us could remember why we had set sail in the first place. Once that realization settled over the crew, the ship itself began to feel different. No longer a vessel with purpose, it became something drifting, moving forward without direction, guided by hands that no longer understood what they were doing. Yet the work continued because it had to. The sails were adjusted, the ropes were checked, the watch was kept. Even without purpose, the habits of the sea ran deep in every sailor. But beneath that routine, something was changing, something quiet and dangerous. The men began to question not just the voyage, but themselves. One sailor claimed he could remember a family waiting for him somewhere, but could not recall where. Another insisted we had been sent on a mission of importance, but could not explain what it was. As the days passed, these fragments of memory began to feel less like truth and more like stories we were telling ourselves to fill the growing emptiness in our minds. Then something even stranger began to happen. The horizon never seemed to change. No matter how many days we sailed, the view remained the same, endless water, endless sky, no sign of land, no change in the wind, no indication that we were moving toward anything at all. And that was when the fear truly took hold. A ship at sea without a destination is not just lost, it is something far worse. It is adrift in a way that cannot be measured or corrected. As the nights grew longer, the men began to whisper a new thought, one none of us wanted to say aloud: what if we were never meant to arrive anywhere? What if the voyage itself was all that remained, and everything else had already been forgotten long before we ever realized it? Once that thought took hold, it spread through the crew like a slow, creeping frost, settling into every corner of the ship. Even the smallest actions began to feel uncertain, because without a destination, every task lost its meaning. Yet none of us could stop performing them. The sails were still raised, the course still held, the watches still changed at the same hours, as if some invisible structure continued to guide us even while our understanding of it faded. That contradiction became one of the most disturbing parts of the voyage, because our bodies remembered what our minds could not. Sometimes a sailor would begin a task and suddenly stop halfway through, staring at his own hands as if he did not understand why he had started moving in the first place. Others would watch him in silence, unsure whether to speak or simply continue their own work as if nothing had happened. The captain remained at the center of it all, standing near the helm, watching the horizon with the same fixed expression. Day after day, never changing course, never explaining anything. When pressed again, he gave the same answer: keep your course. Some began to wonder if he remembered any more than the rest of us, or if he too was simply following a command that had lost its origin long ago. During one of those long gray afternoons, something new happened, something small but deeply unsettling. One of the sailors claimed that he had found writing carved into the wood near the lower deck. At first, no one believed him, because ships often carried marks, scratches from tools, old repairs, signs left by previous voyages. But when he brought others to see it, the mood changed immediately, because the words were fresh, cut into the wood with a blade, sharp and deliberate. They read in uneven letters: "We were not always here." For a long moment, no one spoke. The meaning of those words was impossible to ignore. They suggested a time before this, a beginning that none of us could remember. The more we stared at them, the more another question began to rise: who had carved them? None of the crew admitted to it, and the idea that someone had written those words without remembering doing so was far more disturbing than the message itself. From that point forward, the ship began to feel less like a place we controlled and more like something we were trapped inside, something that carried its own memory even as ours faded. In the days that followed, more markings appeared, not all at once, but slowly, scattered across the ship in places where sailors passed every day yet somehow had not noticed before: short phrases, symbols, lines that looked almost like maps but led nowhere. Each one seemed to tell the same quiet story, that something had been forgotten, something important, something that might explain why we were here and why we could not leave. The crew began to search the ship more carefully now, opening old storage compartments, checking beneath loose boards, examining every corner, as if the answer might be hidden somewhere within the wood itself. Sometimes they found objects that felt unfamiliar even though they should not have been: a journal with pages torn out, tools that no one remembered using, pieces of equipment that did not seem to belong to our ship and yet were clearly part of it. Every discovery only deepened the unease, because it suggested that our memories had not simply faded, they had been altered, removed piece by piece, until only fragments remained. Yet the ship continued forward, cutting through the endless water as if guided by a purpose none of us could recall. At night, the silence became heavier than ever. Conversations that once filled the lower deck had begun to disappear, replaced by quiet watching, listening, waiting for something none of us could name. Some sailors started to claim that they felt as if they had already lived these days before, that they recognized certain moments, certain movements of the sea, certain sounds of the ship, repeating in a pattern just beyond understanding. When they tried to explain it, the others listened but said nothing, because deep down, many of them felt it too, a strange sense that time itself was no longer moving in a straight line, but circling back on itself, repeating small pieces again and again, while the larger picture remained lost. One night, during the middle watch, something happened that none of us could ignore. The bell was rung, signaling a change in watch, but no one had touched it. The sound echoed across the deck, sharp and clear, cutting through the stillness. Every sailor turned toward it at once, because that bell had always required a hand to move it, a deliberate action, a signal of order and routine. But now it had sounded on its own. As the echo faded, the crew stood frozen, listening for another sound, another sign that something was wrong, but there was only silence. Slowly, almost unwillingly, the sailors began to move again, taking their positions, continuing their tasks as if the routine demanded it, even when reason did not. That was the moment when many of us realized something we had not wanted to accept until then: we were no longer in control of the voyage. Whatever purpose had once guided this ship, whatever reason had brought us out onto the open sea, it was no longer something we understood or commanded. Yet it continued to carry us forward through the endless horizon. As that understanding settled into the crew, the question that had started everything, "Where are we going?" slowly changed into something far more terrifying. Not where are we going, but why are we still moving at all? After that night, the feeling aboard the ship changed in a way that none of us could fully describe. It was no longer just confusion or fear, it was something heavier, something that pressed down on every man like an unseen weight. Now we understood that whatever was happening was not temporary. It was not something that would pass with time or resolve itself with reason. It had already taken hold of us completely, and the ship itself felt different beneath our feet, as if the wood carried a quiet tension, as if every plank, every beam, every rope was part of something larger, something we could not see but could feel in the way the vessel moved through the water, steady, unchanging, unwavering, as though it no longer needed the crew to guide it. Some of the men began to notice patterns in our routine, things that should not have repeated but did, the same sailor standing watch at the same hour, the same creak in the hull at the same moment each night, the same shift of wind at the same point in the day. At first, these details seemed small, easily dismissed as coincidence. But as they continued to repeat again and again, the truth became impossible to ignore. We were not just forgetting, we were reliving. That realization brought a deeper kind of fear, because forgetting could be explained. Time could move forward, memories could fade. But repetition suggested something else entirely, something that trapped us within the same stretch of time, unable to move beyond it. Some sailors began marking the days, cutting lines into the wood, trying to keep track of time in a way that memory no longer could. But even that began to fail, because the marks themselves seemed wrong. Sometimes there were more than expected, sometimes fewer, as if the passage of time was no longer consistent. One man swore that he had carved the same mark twice in the same place, though no one else had seen him do it. When he was asked to explain, he simply shook his head, unable to find the words, as if the memory had already begun to slip away even as he spoke. The captain still said nothing more than, "Keep your course," standing at the helm with the same fixed gaze, as though he were watching something far beyond the horizon, something none of us could see, and yet all of us could feel, drawing us forward with quiet certainty. During one of those repeating days, we made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden beneath a loose section of floorboards near the lower deck, one of the sailors found a bundle wrapped in old cloth. When it was brought into the light and opened, every man nearby felt the air grow colder. Inside was a journal, worn and damaged as if it had been handled many times over a long period, and yet none of us recognized it as belonging to the current voyage. When it was opened, the first page revealed something none of us were prepared for. It was written in a familiar hand, one we all knew, because it belonged to our captain, and the date at the top was from a time none of us could remember, weeks, maybe months before what we believed to be the beginning of our journey. The words themselves were simple but carried a weight that settled deep into every man who read them. We must not forget why we sail. As the pages were turned, the writing grew more frantic, less controlled, describing the same confusion, the same questions, the same loss of purpose that we were experiencing now. Entries spoke of memory slipping away, of the crew asking the same questions over and over, of the ship continuing on a course that no one could explain. One entry near the end, written with a shaking hand, stood out above all the others. "If you are reading this, it has already happened again." The silence that followed was unbearable. There was no denying what those words meant. This had not happened once, it had happened before, perhaps many times. Each time, the same pattern repeated, the same loss, the same confusion, the same endless voyage. The journal became proof that we had already lived through this cycle more than once. That realization broke something in the crew. Now the question was no longer how to remember or regain control, but whether it was even possible at all. Some men panicked, searching the ship more desperately than before, looking for anything that might explain how to break the cycle. Others withdrew into silence, sitting alone, staring at the floor, trying to hold on to thoughts that were already slipping away. The sea around us remained unchanged, endless and indifferent, stretching in every direction, without a single sign of land or escape. As the ship moved forward once more through that unchanging horizon, a new understanding began to take shape, far more terrifying than anything we had faced before. We were not lost at sea, we were trapped within it, caught in a voyage that refused to end, repeating again and again, while our memories slowly faded each time, until nothing remained but the motion of the ship and the endless question that had started it all: where are we going? After the journal was discovered, nothing aboard the ship felt stable anymore. It was no longer just fear or suspicion, it was proof, written in our own captain's hand, that this voyage had already happened before and would likely happen again. The crew began to focus not only on memories, but on patterns, on signs that might lead them back to the moment the captain had spoken of, a point where the cycle could have been broken. Every detail became important: the timing of the watches, the position of the stars, the movement of the wind, the sounds of the ship at certain hours. Somewhere within those repeating elements, the answer had to exist. As the days continued to loop and the ship sailed onward through the unchanging sea, a growing sense of urgency spread. The journal had shown us that the entries became shorter as the cycles repeated, less detailed, more fragmented. That meant that the next time memory faded, there might not be enough left to rediscover the truth again. The crew pushed forward, driven by the instinct that doing nothing would guarantee the same outcome. They watched everything more closely than ever: the smallest changes in the wind, the exact timing of each watch, the subtle shifts in the ship's movement, searching for anything that might mark the moment the captain had spoken of. And then something unusual began to stand out, not in the sea, not in the sky, but in the behavior of the ship itself. At a certain hour each cycle, just before the light faded into evening, there was a subtle hesitation in the vessel's movement. So slight it could easily be dismissed as a change in current or wind. But once noticed, it became impossible to ignore, because it happened again and again at the same point in time, a brief moment where the ship seemed to resist its own forward motion. When the crew realized this, they gathered quietly, watching for it, counting the moments until it came again. And when it did, the tension on deck became almost unbearable. This might be it. This might be the moment where something could be changed. For the first time since the beginning of the voyage, the crew acted differently. Men moved to the rigging, loosening the sails, while others turned toward the helm, ready to force the wheel against its usual course. All eyes turned to the captain, waiting to see if he would stop them, or if he would finally break from the command he had repeated for so long. For a brief moment, nothing happened. The ship held that strange hesitation. The air itself felt still, as if the world waited to see what would come next. Then the captain moved, not to stop them, but to place his hands firmly on the wheel. For the first time, his voice carried something different, almost like memory, almost like understanding. "Turn it back." The word struck the crew like a jolt. They were not the command they had come to expect, they were something new, something that broke the pattern. Without hesitation, the men acted together, forcing the wheel, pulling the sails, shifting the direction of the ship. For a moment, it seemed to work. The vessel responded slowly at first, resisting, then gradually beginning to turn. The horizon shifted ever so slightly, as if the path ahead was no longer fixed. A wave of hope, of control, spread through the crew. This time might be different. The ship continued to turn. The air grew colder, not with the natural chill of the sea, but with something deeper, rising from the water itself. The sky darkened in a way that did not match the fading light, as if the world resisted the change. Some sailors hesitated, hands trembling on the ropes, movements slowing. Doubt crept back in, the change felt wrong, unnatural, as if they were pushing against something that did not want to be altered. Then the first voice spoke, quietly, uncertainly: "Why are we turning?" The words hung in the air, heavy. Others echoed it, looking around, seeing the situation for the first time, their earlier determination fading. The captain's grip tightened on the wheel. His expression shifted as if he felt it too, the memory breaking apart once more. He shouted louder than before, louder than anyone had ever heard him. don't forget. For a moment, it held. The crew froze their attention on him, on the action, on the change. The ship continued to turn, the horizon shifting further, the path ahead no longer straight and endless, but uncertain and different. Then something unexpected happened. The journal, the one they had found beneath the deck, carrying the memory of every cycle, slipped from the sailor's hands and fell to the deck. Pages scattered in the wind. The words began to fade, not slowly, naturally, but all at once, as if erased by something unseen. The sight struck the crew harder than anything before, proof that whatever force held us here would not allow even memory itself to survive if it threatened the cycle. The realization cut through the confusion. If we lost this moment, there would be nothing left to guide us next time, no journal, no markings, no fragments of understanding, just an empty repetition with no way to remember that escape had ever been possible. The captain saw it too. His grip tightened, his voice rose, "This is the last time." Something in those words, in the way he said them, cut through the fog in our minds, sharper than anything else. It carried a certainty that none of us could ignore, not a guess, not a hope, but a truth felt deep within us. This moment would not come again. With that, the crew acted, not perfectly, not without hesitation, but with enough force, enough will to push through the breaking edges of memory. The ship responded. Resistance grew stronger. The sea itself seemed to pull against us, trying to drag us back into the endless path. But we did not stop. We held on to the action itself, pulling, turning, forcing the ship away from what it had always done. Suddenly, without warning, the resistance broke, all at once, like tension snapping free. The ship lurched violently beneath our feet. The wheel spun in the captain's hands, the sails cracked in the wind, and the vessel surged forward into a direction it had never taken before. For a moment, there was nothing, no sound, no movement, no sense of time. Then the sea returned, the wind returned, the weight of the ship beneath our feet solid, real, unchanged, and yet different. The horizon ahead was no longer empty. Faint, but unmistakable, there was land, dark and solid, rising from the water like something long lost, finally found. The crew stood in silence, staring at it, unable to speak, unable to fully understand what they were seeing. Something else had changed as well, the questions were gone, the confusion lifted, not completely, not perfectly, but enough to leave behind a single clear thought: we made it. The captain slowly released the wheel, his hands trembling. He looked out toward the land, his expression no longer empty, no longer distant, but filled with relief, the first relief we had felt since the beginning of the voyage. Even in that moment, however, one last unsettling truth remained. One sailor looked down at the deck where the journal pages had fallen. They were still scattered across the wood, blank, untouched, as if nothing had ever been written. He quietly asked the question that no one else wanted to speak aloud. If we made it this time, then why does it feel like we've already been here before? The wind carried his words across the water, leaving behind only the sound of the ship moving forward, and the distant shape of land growing closer as the story came to an end.